everyone? So, about 2 months later, I think, I am finally getting around to the second part of my What Musicals Mean to Me series. And this time, I am talking about none other than Six the Musical. As you can tell, well, maybe barely, by this sweatshirt. So, yeah, as you can tell, it's been a while, but I won't go into too much detail in this video. You'll have to watch another video in order to figure out exactly why. And let's just say it's because a lot of stuff has been going on in my life that I don't have time to go into right now, but let's forget about it and just fangirl about a musical together. And honestly, I would say now's a pretty good time for me to release it, considering the 2021 Tony Awards are coming. The Tony Awards are coming out pretty soon, and it just so happens that Six of the Musical is one of the nominees. It's been a long time coming, and honestly, I am all the more thankful for it because when the musical finally was supposed to premiere on Broadway, is right when the quarantine started and Broadway shut down. Dark times for not only the theater fans who eat this stuff up, but also for the poor actresses who were out of work for the longest time. So, anyways, without any further delay, I'm going to get into, just like with the Haiti Someone, I'm going to get into how I came across this musical and what it means to me. Although, admittedly, this time, it's going to have more to do with what it means to me as a woman rather than as an autistic person. So, starting off, how did I come across this musical? Well, it actually started in Christmas of 2019 when, well, not Christmas Day, Christmas Eve of 2019 when my family and I were driving home from Christmas Eve, or Christmas Mass, and we were listening to the Broadway radio on Sirius XM because that's, as you can tell, that's one of my favorite stations, and that's actually kind of how I really got into musicals in the first place, but that's a story for another day. So we were listening to that, and lo and behold, All You Want to Do comes on, and it's from a musical called Six, and I had no idea what the musical was at that point in time. Though my sister did inform me that it's a musical about the 6 wives of King Henry VIII. And I, of course, along with probably many other students, had learned about it in high school, but the only ones I could remember were Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour. And even then, with Jane Seymour, it was really only after I heard her introduction in Ex-Wives, Jane Seymour, the only one he truly loved. And I was like, oh yeah, the name rings a bell, shakes a tambourine. And speaking of Jane, just kind of want to warn you ahead of time, this might as well be called What Jane Seymour Means to Me, because I am going to be talking a lot about her, because I just feel like she's the one who resonated with me the most, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, after I heard about that, I kind of listened to that song a few times on Amazon, on Amazon Music, and also on YouTube. But after a while, it was really just only that one, and I kind of forgot about it. But then, fast forward a few months, my dad and sister and I are playing Be a Broadway Star, a Broadway board game, down here in the basement, and my dad has the Sirius XM radio playing on his computer, and lo and behold, the opening song, Ex-Wives, comes on the radio, and I was only able to hear a little bit of it because he was kind of playing it in the background while we were playing, but from what I heard, I quite enjoyed it. It was a really fun song, and I was like, I want to hear more of this. So after that, I kind of started listening to that and some more of the soundtrack bit by bit, and I really fell in love with the music, and it kind of started to tell me a little bit more about exactly who these ladies were and everything that they endured in their lives. But, of course, for me, it didn't just stop at the cast recording, I started going on YouTube and I started getting some recommendations for animatics of some of the songs, including one channel known as Tutor Von Arts, which I covered in my video author's note / author's commentary for my fanfiction The Mother, my first and currently only Six the Musical fanfiction. There may or may not be more in the future, but again, that's a story for another time. So I watched that, and it was disturbingly amazing. Like, they didn't hold back with some of the more uncomfortable details revolving around the life of Catherine Howard, because when you really start to dive into her backstory, you learn just how much of a tumultuous childhood this poor girl really led. And, you know, on one hand, I was really impressed that they were able to draw all of that frame by frame, and that they really did that amount of research to really understand how the events played out. But on the other hand, because it was so graphic, and because I really got a deep dive into just what this poor girl went through, I started to get really, really uncomfortable, to the point where I would even be kept up at night, and I even started getting to the point of struggling to breathe because I get this tight feeling in my throat. Yeah, I empathized way, 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 way too much with these ladies, to the point where it kind of became unhealthy. So, but anyways, it didn't stop there. After I checked that out, I started checking out more of the animatics by Tutor Von Arts. There was No Way, Don't Lose Your Head, Heart of Stone, Get Down, and I was blown away. Simply blown away. Though I think the one that blew me away the most was, in fact, Heart of Stone. Because I remember I checked that one out one morning after my sister said that she listened to that song, and it really gave her the feels. So I was like, what the heck? Might as well. And so I check out the animatic, and, you know, at first it's just kind of your at first it was pretty standard, you know, really good, and I don't know. First it was really good, but then it really, really, really sold it for me when we actually saw Jane not only navigate her pregnancy somewhat, but we also saw her going through the drudgery of labor. And again, I think that mostly appealed to me because of my own personal weird fascinations, but that was kind of another one that kept me up at night, because that song, I think, combined with the animatic, hit me so deeply, and to a point where it kind of became an unhealthy obsession, where I just couldn't stop watching it because I couldn't get it out of my mind, to the point where it would even keep me up at night. So you may be wondering, you know, why are you talking so negatively about a musical that you love so much? Well, it's because I kind of have to admit, sometimes when you get interested in something, you can dive yourself into the unhealthy territory. And I also think part of it was because, like I said, I got into this in 2020, which was the quarantine period for a lot of people, and it was rough on a lot of people. And I guess because I was sitting at home without much to do, after I'd finished my online classes, I kind of turned to that, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole. But eventually I took a little bit of a break and kind of went back to Hadestown, which I'm still currently very hooked on, but I still take some time to show some appreciation for Six the Musical every now and then. And I think what really helped me cope with it was, one, when I actually saw a slime tutorial of the musical on YouTube. I don't know, something about seeing it live, I guess maybe, and I guess also maybe because seeing the ending song, you know, which is also the title song, kind of gave me a bit of closure, a little bit of relief. You know, at first, of course, my unhealthy obsession was like, you know, why are they singing such a why is this so positive? You know, they're singing about all these things, but that's not what happened in real life. You know, it doesn't connect. But of course, then I realized the whole point of it is that it's supposed to be about them moving on from their past lives and moving on and towards the present and the future, away from their scummy ex-husband, realizing that they can now be defined in their own merit now that we're living in a new century where women are gaining more rights and they are, and their stories are being told, and we are starting to see them for who they are and not just who they're associated with. So, and then there's also the fact that that the fan fictions also helped on Archive of Our Own, even though a lot of them are kind of modern AUs or reincarnations of them, and I don't really care for that, but I don't know, seeing such depictions of them, more positive, lighthearted depictions of them, kind of coping with their past, moving on, kind of comforting each other, helping each other navigate their own obstacles, it kind of helped me in a way. I think maybe because I saw myself in a lot of them, since I've struggled with a lot of issues myself, and I think when I empathize with someone, I personally tend to take on their emotions as if they're my own, and I don't do that intentionally, mind you. It's just something my weird brain does, completely by accident. I just see someone going through something, and part of me just wants to say, oh yeah, that sucks, and leave it at that, but no. My crazy, emotional, hypersensitive brain will not allow for that. I have to take on somebody's negative emotions, and sometimes positive, as if they're my own, and feel it, and it tortures me. But anyways, so that's kind of how I got into the musical, was first listening to the cast recording, then getting into the animatics, and then reading some fan fiction on Archive of Our Own, since there weren't a ton on fanfiction.net, and then my sister introduced me to Archive of Our Own in January of 2021. I think it was January of 2021, but anyways, and I will say that the lack of good 6 fanfictions on fanfiction.net is kind of what inspired me to write The Mother, and I guess maybe the reason I kind of stopped writing 6 fanfictions was because I saw so many good ones on Archive of Our Own, and also because I kind of started getting more into Hadestown. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I still really like Six the Musical. It's just my hyperfixations kind of tend to jump every few months or years, and I can't exactly control it, but there is still a possibility I may come back to that someday. So, now that you know kind of how I got into it, let me talk about what this show really means to me. And most fans of the show will tell you that the reason why they got into this is because of the queens themselves, or because of the moral of the show. There's 6 leading lady characters, so, I'm not saying guys can't identify with them, but of course girls are more likely to identify with them. So you're bound to find one that you can see yourself in. Some people may see themselves in Catherine Howard because they can relate to having to keep their chin up in the midst of a very tumultuous time. Some people can relate to Catherine of Aragon because they can relate to, doing all of these, accomplishing all of these triumphant tasks, and yet being completely pushed to the side and having nobody see them just because all they can see is one side of you, whether it be your race or your gender or your ability status. And personally, the queen that I identify with the most is Jane Seymour. And I mean, don't get me wrong, this isn't me saying that she's better than all the other ones, because they're all great. All the queens have their positive traits about them. They're all terrific role models in their own way. Not that they're perfect, but nobody is, because you would have to be not human to be perfect. But anyways, I'm rambling. The reason why Jane resonated with me so much is because she showed a different kind of strength. A strength different than her 2 predecessors, Catherine of Aragon or Anne Boleyn. Jane even kind of points this out in the show, where she says that because they were 2 absolute badass monarchs, they were able to stand up to Henry, when he raged and stormed at them, they raged and stormed right back, gave him the what for. But Jane, she didn't do any of that. She displayed strength. She was bigger on the inside, let's put it that way. She was bigger on the inside. She, mother to Mary, did one. She cared for her when nobody else was willing to do so. I mean, she did kind of help mend the relationship between Henry and Mary, but I choose to focus more on her relationship with Jane because Henry was freaking disgusting, and it's his fault that Mary got... And he's the one who exiled Mary from the palace in the first place and even disowned her as his daughter. But anyways, and not to mention, that was no small feat. Because like I said, Mary was exiled from the palace, basically not seen as part of the royal family. Jane could have easily been killed for what she did, but she didn't care. She just saw that this girl needed someone to stand by her side, someone to show her that she wasn't alone and that somebody still cared for her. And Jane decided that someone was going to be her. So, at the very risk of her own life, or at least her own status, she stepped up to the plate and brought Mary into court and treated her as though she was her own. And, then there's also the fact, and then there's also the fact that there was one time when she did try to speak up, when Henry had plans to prosecute and even execute the pilgrims from the Pilgrimage of Grace, I think it was called, and she stepped up and said, no, you can't do this. These people may have hurt your vanity, but they haven't hurt your heart. Okay, slight creative liberties, but she actually stepped up and told him, no, you can't do this, and he basically shut her down and reminded her of the fate of her predecessor. So, again, you can say that was one time that she actually dared to speak up and show some strength, kind of like her predecessors, and some people may be saying, well, she backed down, so that doesn't count. You try standing up to someone who is not only your husband, but also the king of an entire freaking nation who has the very power to kill you. But anyways, that's basically all that's not all I have to say about Jane. I had a lot because I think that she's really underestimated, and I feel like the show itself, I kind of understand that there were 6 ladies all with their own backstories, so you kind of had to even it out, and there obviously wasn't going to be room for everybody to shine, but I just feel like Jane kind of gets treated like a punchline mostly throughout the show, outside of the one moment in her introduction where she actually steps up to tell her story about how she displayed strength in her own way. And it almost sounds like she's kind of unfairly comparing herself, talking about how badass Anne and Catherine of Aragon were, and how she didn't do any of that, and how she wasn't quite as badass as they were, but she was, just in a different kind of way. And I guess that's kind of why it resonated with me so much, because I'm not like, people would look at me and they wouldn't think I'm the typical kind of strong. I'm not into sports. I can't run fast. I was like the second slowest runner in my class. I can be outspoken from time to time, but that's really only on subjects that I'm really interested in. Other than that, you'll usually find me in the corner reading or on my phone or writing in my journal. But, I show my strength in other ways. I have a very big heart, and I use that in my job as a teacher's assistant. I knew that a teacher's assistant at a private school wasn't going to pay a lot of money, but I did it because I really wanted to be a role model to those kids, someone to show them that there's somebody looking out for them. And that's also why I volunteered to be a teammate's mentor, because I knew that there was someone out there who came from a family that didn't give them the compassion or the nurturing or the attention they needed. So I decided that I had to step up and be the person to compensate for that. Show someone that, there was someone they could talk to, someone that they could rely on. So, and that's also kind of why I got into social work, because I wanted to help people, even though I didn't end up pursuing a career in that. I'm very much driven by my heart, and to see that reflected in a character means so much to me, especially because nowadays we kind of have sort of this nice girls or, nice guys never win, no more Mr. Nice Guy or no more Mrs. Nice Girl, that you have to be tough and brash and outspoken and all that stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, everything is so aggressive and out there and, amped up. And sometimes it's nice to get something, sometimes it's a refreshing change of pace when you have someone who's a little bigger on the inside, a little quieter, who displays strength in a different way. And we don't get a lot of that nowadays. The few times I have seen the girls who are portrayed as kind or sweet, they're either dumb, like, I guess, Kat Valentine from Victorious, or it's shown to be just a big farce, like Dahlia Hawthorne from the Phoenix Wright games. So I'm like, why can't we have a girl who is kind, is genuinely kind, and, she doesn't have to be a genius, but can we have a girl who's kind and has brains? Because it's not impossible to be smart and kind. And I mean, I know that with Jane, you might not see that, considering she could barely even read or write, but come on. You gotta tell me that you gotta have brains to do what she did in order to bring Mary to court. You can't be dumb in order to do that. And, you could argue that in the show she may show some sort of... Okay, maybe I'm gonna leave this up to you guys. Can you guys help me, find evidence in the show that Jane's really not stupid? Because we all know that Par's the smart one in the group, but Jane's not dumb. And, she could come across as naive, but she even flat out says in her monologue that she stood by Henry, and she said, quote, "And that wasn't because I was scared, or naive, or weak. It's because I loved him." And again, love takes a lot of strength. She knew... it's debatable whether or not she knew that Henry didn't actually love her, but the point is, Henry did matter to her, but who really mattered to her were her kids. And I say her kids, even though Mary wasn't biologically hers, she treated her like her own, and from what little we know, she was a kind and caring person, and she cared deeply for Henry's kids as if they were her own. Well, okay, technically Edward was her own, but And come on. And again, a lot of people kind of underestimate how much strength it really takes to bear a child. Not that a woman's only purpose is to bear a child, but for the women who do choose to have a baby, we really need to applaud them for their strength, because you're creating another human inside of you. And the fact that she managed to successfully deliver a baby, even though he was breech, and the fact that she endured 3 whole nights of labor. I mean, seriously, girl, you got guts. And I know she unfortunately died, but as we've seen in Catherine Parr's case, unfortunately, some women who do come down with childbed fever die a lot sooner. Not that that's a sign of weakness, but the fact that she managed to survive longer is also kind of a symbol of strength. Now, I've gone on and on and on about Jane, but kind of the more I got into it, I realized there was another queen I kind of identified with, and that was Catherine Parr, because I kind of started to relate to her more studious, more introverted, kind of, she's sort of the professor of the group, the one who kind of keeps everybody together. She's sort of the straight man or straight woman of the group who kind of balances out all their craziness. I mean, okay, it's more my sister in the family who balances out all our craziness, but I can relate to her more studious, quiet nature, because I do like to spend a lot of my time reading and writing and doing all that stuff, thinking big, focusing on what's going on inside my mind, everything that I've picked up. And, kind of like Jane, she also wasn't nearly as brash or outspoken as some of her predecessors. She also displayed a lot more of the internal strength, and then there's also the fact that she cared very deeply about women's rights, and that's kind of what my goals are, though specifically it's for women on the autism spectrum, because, typically for women on the autism spectrum, because a lot of them have had trouble actually getting a diagnosis or having their diagnosis accepted by the general public in the first place, because there's still sort of that false idea that autism is a boys-only condition. And I also mentioned that I hope to spread the word about how OBGYNs and other women's health workers can better improve themselves in order to work together with autistic patients through pregnancy and labor and the postpartum period, and maybe even during gynecological exams, to make them feel a lot more comfortable and to establish better communication with them. So okay, sorry about that, folks. I had a brief interruption. So why don't we actually stop talking about Catherine Parr, not because I don't like her, but because I feel like I've said enough, and kind of move on to somebody else that I can slightly identify with, and that is Anna of Cleves. Now, some of you may be saying, how is that? Well, because I feel like everything that she went through kind of doesn't get talked about enough. And in a way, I kind of understand, because she had the quote-unquote best life, considering that she didn't get beheaded, and she was really only married to Henry for a short amount of time, because he couldn't stand her, though I think that was because she actually took some shots at his ego, which, again, major props, but anyways, the thing is, a lot of people don't really stop to think about this. I mean, imagine if you were taken from a place that you've lived in for several years, maybe even since the day you were born, to get married to some random guy that you've never met before in a country where you don't speak the language and barely anybody there speaks your language, and then you get ambushed by some creepy guy who thinks that he's so charming, and when you're rightly put off by it, he decides to turn the tables and spread some nasty rumor about you and turn all the tables against you, and all you know is people don't like you. You don't know why they don't like you or what you did to deserve this. They just don't like you. So yeah, that is kind of how I know that feeling. I mean, even though I was born and raised in the US, sometimes social interactions with the other kids, when I was finally put in school, it was rough, to put it mildly. Because parents decided it would be a wise idea to inform the staff that I was autistic, but not to treat me any differently than any other student, because they didn't want anyone underestimating me, because they didn't know how far I would progress. But what that really led to was me being bullied to heck and back, people thinking that I was the most annoying person on the planet, and me not knowing that there was something going on with me, so I couldn't explain that I was new to this, and that I didn't understand, and because I didn't have an instruction manual, and I didn't understand what the heck I was supposed to do, and I didn't understand why people hated me so much. I knew I was doing something wrong, but I didn't know what. But of course, once I actually learned about my autism diagnosis, I managed to, put everything into perspective. I got proper social skills training, though, okay, kind of admittedly, I've gotten social skills training, but I also kind of decided it'd be better just not to try at all, unless under very specific circumstances, unless we are talking about something that I'm good at or that I like. So I have improved since my childhood in some ways, but in some ways I have a way to go. So, you know, what am I trying to get at through all of this babbling? What I'm trying to get at is what I really, really appreciate the most about Six the Musical is the fact that it's a musical about 6 leading ladies, each with their own story and their own backgrounds. So you get insight into, you know, who they are and what they want, you know, their dreams, their desires, their personalities, their quirks, their flaws, their traumas, their struggles. And then there's also the message that comes along with it, which is not only the fact that you're strong in your own way, but also the fact that every struggle is valid, which Parr kind of even points out in after the Queen's fight, you know, saying that it's ridiculous to have this competition about who had the most trauma or who had the worst marriage. Because, all in all, why are you comparing something so negative? Why does it have to be a competition? Because all in all, you went through something horrible, and it sucks. And I see this a lot. And sadly, I've seen this a lot in the Six fandom, despite the fact that the show flat out says don't compare each other. And I can only assume the reason people do it is either because they forget the message entirely, or at worst, they choose to disregard it because it's fun. And again, I've even seen people who say that Jane should stop whining because she didn't live long enough to be beheaded, so therefore she didn't have a brutal death. Let me put it this way. Would you go up to, say, a domestic abuse survivor who was a domestic abuse victim who was trapped in a marriage with a pig of a husband and had no idea how to get out, and just say, well, at least you weren't assaulted when you were a child, so why are you complaining? And would you say the same thing to a woman on her deathbed after enduring a traumatizing, physically and mentally and emotionally, labor and pregnancy and, you know, postpartum complications? Would you say that? Of course you wouldn't, because that would be horrible. So don't say that about someone who currently isn't alive, because at the end of the day, these were real people, and that's something that a lot of people tend to forget about this musical and about a lot of other stories that are about real people, because they, you know, they do add some fictional elements, like with the costumes and modern slang, and the fact that they have songs with sort of a modern twist to them. But again, at the end of the day, these were real people with real life traumas and real thoughts and experiences and hopes and families and everything. So, and again, there are two things, so at the end of the day, there are two things to keep in mind. They're basically the same thing, but they're just two different phrases. One that I found on Pinterest, which said something like, a person who drowns in 5 feet of water is just as dead as someone who drowns in 3 feet of water. Or kind of one that or kind of an analogy that I like to go with is, you know, a paper cut is obviously not going to be deemed as serious as a laceration, but there's still differences between the two, because in some cases, like with burns, if the wound cuts deep enough, then you don't feel as much pain, because some wounds cut deep enough to destroy nerve endings, but obviously you gotta still keep them clean to prevent dirt and germs from getting deep into tissue, and so that the person doesn't bleed out. And in the case of someone with a paper cut, obviously you're not going to die from a paper cut, but anybody who's gotten one is going to tell you it hurts like a mother. And plus, you still got to properly clean and cover it, because they can still get infected, and if it gets infected, that can lead to a whole variety of problems. So, no matter what the trauma is, it's important to understand that whatever you're going through mentally is valid, because if it's not taken care of, then you're not really living, you're just surviving. So, I'd say that's something that really hits home for me, especially with the current circumstances, not just because of the pandemic, but because of other things I've gone through, like my bullying and something that I'll get into in another video. So, at the end of the day, Six the Musical means so much to me because it's about six leading ladies with their own personalities and their own identities that someone out there can identify with. Even though Jane and Parr are my favorites, I think they were all incredible in their own way, and kudos to everyone who can appreciate all their strengths and everything that they brought to the table. And I also appreciate it because of the messages of female empowerment and the fact that every struggle is valid. So, thank you Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss for creating such a brilliant masterpiece of a musical, and I wish Marlowe and Moss and the current Broadway cast the best of luck at the Tonys. I really hope you win because you deserve it. So, that's that, and join me in 30 years, give or take, for my third and final installation of What Musicals Mean to Me, Wicked.